The wind howled across the frozen land, carrying sharp snowflakes that cut against the skin like tiny blades. A team of human explorers struggled through the storm, their heavy boots sinking into the deep white ground. Each step was harder than the last, and the cold air burned their lungs. "Keep moving," shouted Daniel, the leader of the group. His voice was muffled by the storm, but the others followed him. They had been sent to survey this region, far from the nearest human city, searching for signs of rare minerals hidden under the endless ice. The storm was growing worse, and the team thought about turning back. Then one of them, a young woman named Clara, stopped suddenly. Her boot had struck something solid under the snow. Not rock, not ice, but something different. She bent down, brushing away the snow with her gloved hands. Her eyes widened. "Daniel," she called out, her voice shaking. "There's something here." The team gathered around. They dug with their tools, breaking through the layers of hard ice. What slowly appeared made them freeze in place. Beneath the snow was a figure, a body trapped under crystal-clear ice. The form looked almost human, with arms, legs, and a face. But the details were strange. The skin had a faint blue glow, and strange patterns like silver lines ran across the surface. "It's a person," whispered Clara, though her voice was filled with doubt. Or something like a person. The storm howled louder, as if nature itself wanted to bury the figure again. The group hesitated, fear mixing with curiosity. Some of them wanted to leave it buried, saying it was dangerous. But Daniel shook his head. "We came here to discover," he said firmly. And this is the greatest discovery we may ever find." They worked together, cutting away the ice. Their hands trembled, not from cold, but from the thought of what they might awaken. When they finally freed the upper body, the face became clear. The stranger's eyes were closed, long lashes frozen with frost. The features were delicate yet sharp, not fully human, not fully alien. Clara leaned closer, pressing her hand against the ice near the chest, her breath caught in her throat. "It's warm," she whispered. "This body, it's not dead." The others stared in disbelief. No frozen thing could be warm, not in this land where even steel turned brittle. Yet there it was, a faint heat pulsing from beneath the icy prison. Suddenly, a soft sound escaped the strangers' lips. A low, broken gasp. The explorers stepped back in shock. Hearts pounded, fear and wonder mixed inside them. The stranger was alive. Daniel's mind raced. If this being was alive, who was it? Where did it come from? And why was it buried? Under the snow, he looked at the storm, at his team, then back at the glowing figure. "We can't leave it here," Daniel said. "Help me lift it." Some protested, afraid of bringing a possible danger into their camp. But the wind roared like an angry beast, and Clara's pleading eyes convinced them. They carefully wrapped the figure in thermal cloth and carried it toward their shelter. The journey back was a battle against the storm. The snow tried to swallow their tracks. The icy wind pushed against their bodies, yet none of them dared to stop. The weight of the stranger was heavy, but heavier still was the mystery they now carried. At last, they reached their wooden shelter built against the side of a frozen cliff. Inside, the fire cracked weakly, barely holding against the cold that seeped in through the walls. They laid the stranger on a thick blanket near the flames. Steam rose as ice melted from the skin, revealing more of the glowing patterns that curled across the arms like living veins of silver. Clara could not look away. She felt as though the being's presence filled the small shelter with unseen power. The air itself seemed to hum softly. The others whispered in fear. Some wanted to push it back outside into the snow. Others argued that this could be the key to knowledge. Then, as if answering their debate, the stranger's lips moved. The voice was weak, trembling, but the words were clear enough for them all to hear. "Don't send me back." The fire popped loudly. The storm screamed outside, and silence fell in the shelter. Every eye stared at the frozen stranger, not knowing what danger or miracle they had just brought into their lives. The shelter was silent, except for the crackling of the weak fire and the distant scream of the storm outside. The explorers sat close together, their eyes fixed on the figure they had dragged from the snow. None of them dared to move. The stranger's faint words still echoed in their ears. "Don't send me back." Daniel's jaw tightened. He had led men and women into caves, across frozen seas and through storms before, but never had he felt this kind of fear. This was not fear of nature. This was fear of the unknown. Clara sat nearest to the figure. Her hand hovered above its glowing skin, afraid to touch, yet unable to pull away. The markings on the body glimmered softly, pulsing like veins of light. They seemed alive, responding to the heat of the fire and the presence of the humans. Suddenly the stranger's body shuddered. A deep rattling breath filled the air. The explorers gasped. The chest rose and fell, stronger now. The eyes snapped open. They were not human eyes. The pupils were long and thin, like shards of glass, surrounded by a ring of glowing blue light. The gaze swept across the shelter, sharp and desperate. For a moment, no one breathed. Then Clara whispered gently, "You're safe." The stranger flinched at the sound of her voice. His lips moved, forming words slowly, clumsily, as though he had not spoken in ages. "Where am I?" he asked. The voice was rough, broken, but carried weight. Daniel stepped forward cautiously. "You are in our camp. We found you in the ice." He paused, then asked, "Who are you?" The stranger's eyes darted between them. His chest rose quickly, panic flashing across his face. His body glowed brighter, and suddenly strange things happened. The fire leapt higher without wood. Tools lifted from the ground and hung in the air. The walls of the shelter creaked as if pushed by invisible hands. The explorers scrambled back in terror. Some shouted, some reached for their weapons. Clara, however, leaned closer. "Stop, please, we won't hurt you," she said. Her voice trembled, but her words carried warmth. The stranger's power dimmed. The tools dropped with a crash. The fire settled. His breathing slowed. He pressed a hand to his head as though in pain. "No. No back," he whispered again. "They will find me." Clara frowned. "Who will find you?" He looked at her with fear burning in his glowing eyes. "Hunters," he said simply. The word sent a chill through the room. The team exchanged nervous glances. Aliens, machines, something else. They did not know, but the tone in his voice told them the hunters were deadly. Daniel took a slow breath. "If there are hunters, we need to know why they want you," he said, trying to stay calm. The stranger shook his head violently. "Danger, I'll die," he muttered. His body trembled as though the memory alone hurt him. "I run, I hide, they follow. Never stop." The explorers felt the weight of his words. It was no accident they had found him buried in the snow. He had been running, he had been escaping, and now, by pulling him free, they had stepped into his nightmare. Suddenly the storm outside shifted. The wind howled louder. But beneath it, there was another sound. A low, metallic hum. The explorers froze. Daniel's eyes narrowed. He knew the sound of engines, and these were not human. The stranger's eyes widened in terror. He gripped Clara's arm with surprising strength. "Too late," he gasped. "They come." The explorers rushed to the small window cut into the wooden wall. Through the blur of snow, they saw faint lights in the sky, moving against the storm, not drifting like stars but cutting through the clouds. Searching, hunting, panic spread among the group. Some shouted that they should hand the stranger over. Others swore they would never betray a living being. The argument grew heated. Fear made their voices rise. Daniel raised his hand, silencing them. His gaze was fixed on the glowing figure. "If these hunters want you, then we need to decide. Do we protect you or do we survive?" he said firmly. The stranger's grip on Clara tightened. His voice cracked. "Please. Not back. Death." The firelight flickered across his glowing markings, casting strange shadows on the walls. Clara felt her heart ache. She saw not a monster, not a weapon, but a terrified soul, alone and hunted. She placed her hand, gently, over his. "We won't give you up," she whispered. "Not while I live." Daniel looked at her, then at the others. Their faces showed fear, but also something else. Resolve. Slowly he nodded. "Then we stand together." The hum outside grew louder, the lights in the sky drew closer, the storm itself seemed to bow before the coming machines. The explorers tightened their coats, grabbed their tools, and braced for what was to come. And at the center of it all, the frozen stranger sat trembling, his glowing eyes locked on the door. His breath came fast, his lips moved silently, repeating the same broken plea. "Don't send me back." The shelter shook as the first shadow passed overhead. The hunters had arrived. The storm raged outside, but it was no longer the only danger. The explorers could feel the air trembling with the deep hum of engines above. Shadows passed across the snow, lights cutting through the blizzard like searching eyes. Inside the shelter, the frozen stranger sat close to the fire, his body glowing brighter with each heartbeat. Clara stayed near him, her hand hovering just above his shoulder. She could feel the heat pulsing through his skin. It was not the heat of fever or sickness, but something deeper, something alive with energy. Daniel moved to the door. His hand gripping the wooden frame, he glanced back at his team. "They're here," he said in a low voice. "We need to be ready." But ready for what? No one knew. The hunters outside were unseen except for their lights. But the stranger's fear was enough to tell them these were no simple visitors. They were trackers, relentless and merciless. Suddenly, the stranger doubled over. His body shook, and the silver markings on his skin blazed like fire. The flames in the hearth leapt high, roaring as though fed by unseen fuel. A wave of force swept through the shelter, knocking tools from shelves, and rattling the wooden walls. The explorers cried out in shock. One man grabbed his knife, shouting, "He's dangerous, he'll kill us all." Clara spun toward him, her eyes blazing with anger. "No," she shouted. "He's afraid, can't you see?" But the man's fear had already taken over. He raised his knife, stepping closer to the stranger. Daniel moved fast, seizing the man's arm and shoving him back. "Enough!" Daniel barked. His voice shook with command. "Fear will kill us faster than he will." The stranger gasped for air. His eyes flickered open, glowing like burning embers. He looked at Clara, then at Daniel. His voice was strained. "Not safe. They find me. They find you." Before anyone could answer, the sound outside grew sharper. The humming turned into a piercing whine, and beams of light swept across the snow, scanning the ground. The shelter glowed faintly under the passing lights. The stranger's body reacted instantly. His markings flared with silver fire. Objects inside the shelter lifted into the air, spinning slowly. A lantern floated upward, its flame stretching into a long ribbon of light. The knife slipped from the frightened man's grip and hovered in the air. Everyone froze, mouths open, fear battling against awe. "What? What are you?" whispered Clara, her voice soft but trembling. The stranger turned toward her, his gaze was heavy with sadness. "Weapon," he whispered, "but not want to be." His words struck her heart like ice. He was not proud of his power, he was ashamed. Daniel's eyes narrowed. "If they want you back, it's because of this, isn't it?" he asked, gesturing at the floating tools and glowing skin. "You are more than they can control." The stranger gave a small nod. His chest rose and fell quickly. "I escape," he muttered. "Buried in snow. Hide, they always come." The explorers looked at one another. Some of them wanted to push him outside, to let the hunters take him. They whispered fearfully, saying he would bring death to them all. But Clara stood firm, her hand finally resting on his arm. She felt the warmth, the trembling, the pain. "No," she said quietly. "You're not a weapon. You're alive, and that matters." The stranger's glowing eyes softened just for a moment, as though her words had reached something buried deep inside him. Then the roof shook violently. Snow poured down through the cracks. The hunters had landed. The sound of metal striking against the frozen ground echoed through the storm. Panic broke inside the shelter. "They've found us," one explorer shouted, rushing toward the back exit. Others grabbed what little weapons they had, axes, knives, tools meant for ice. "Not war." The stranger rose slowly, his movements unsteady. His body glowed brighter than ever, filling the shelter with silver light. He spread his hands and the fire roared higher, wrapping around the stones of the hearth but not burning the wood. It was controlled, bent to his will. Everyone stared in awe, even the ones who had doubted him. Daniel stepped closer, his voice steady. "If you have power, we need it now," he said. "Help us fight, or none of us will live through this night." The stranger looked at him with weary eyes. "Power hurts me," he whispered, "but I try." The walls shook again, louder, heavier, as though fists of metal pounded against them. The sound of grinding gears filled the air, and through the cracks of the door, a bright red light shone, moving back and forth, searching. The explorers held their breath, weapons shaking in their hands. Clara squeezed the stranger's arm, her voice low. "Please don't let them take you. Don't let them take any of us." The stranger lifted his hands. His silver markings spread across his body like fire racing through veins. The tools that had fallen to the floor rose again, sharper, faster, spinning in the air. The air vibrated. With energy, the firelight bent and twisted like it was alive. And then, with a sound like thunder, the door splintered. A beam of red light cut through the wood. Snow and ice blasted inward, and for the first time, the humans saw them. The hunters. Tall, cold mechanical figures stepped into the storm, their eyes glowing crimson. Their arms were weapons, their bodies built for war. They moved with the precision of predators. The explorers gasped, fear flooding their veins, but the stranger stood, his glowing body a shield of silver fire. For the first time, his voice rose strong. "Not back," he shouted. The hunters turned their heads in unison, their crimson eyes locking onto him. And in that moment, the humans realized the storm was no longer their greatest enemy. The storm outside shrieked like a living beast, yet the sound of the hunters drowned it out. Their heavy steps crunched through the snow, their mechanical frames glowing with crimson light. The explorers huddled inside the broken shelter, fear tightening their chests. The stranger stood tall, in the center of the room, his glowing markings blazing like molten silver. His breath came in sharp bursts, his body trembling with the strain of his power. Yet his eyes, glowing blue, did not waver. The first hunter appeared through the shattered doorway. Its head was round and smooth, its face a single red eye that glowed like fire. Steam hissed from its metal joints as it scanned the room. The beam of its eye swept across the explorers, making them freeze. Clara gripped Daniel's arm, her voice trembling. "What are those things?" Daniel's face hardened. "Not anything human," he whispered back. The hunter stepped forward, and behind it came two more. Their movements were silent but heavy, their presence filling the small shelter with dread. They raised their long arms, which split open to reveal glowing barrels, weapons meant for killing. The stranger's body flared with light, silver fire wrapped around his arms. The hunters paused, as though recognizing him. A metallic voice echoed from the lead machine, deep and cold. "Subject located. Return required." The explorers gasped. The voice was not human, not alive. It was the sound of something made only to command and capture. The stranger shook his head. His glowing eyes burned with defiance. "Not back," he said firmly. His voice was stronger than before. "Never back." The hunters tilted their heads in unison. The lead machine stepped closer, its voice like a blade. "Resistance unnecessary. Return or terminated." The stranger spread his hands. A wave of invisible force rushed through the room, knocking loose snow from the roof and pushing the hunters back a single step. The floorboards shook, sparks leapt from the fire. The explorers shielded their faces. One of the hunters raised its weapon and fired. A beam of red energy sliced through the air. Clara screamed as the blast missed her by inches and burned a black hole in the wooden wall. The shelter filled with smoke and sparks. Daniel roared, "Get down!" He pulled Clara to the floor as the others scrambled for cover. Some raised their axes and knives. But what were those against machines of war? The stranger's markings flared brighter. His eyes glowed like suns. He raised both arms, and the fire in the hearth surged into a wall of flame. The hunters fired again. but their beams vanished in the fire. Swallowed by his power, the explorers stared in awe. For the first time they felt a strange hope. But the effort drained him. The stranger staggered, falling to one knee. His body trembled as though the power was tearing him apart. Clara crawled to his side. "Stop. You'll kill yourself," she begged. He shook his head, sweat glistening on his glowing skin. "Protect you," he whispered. His voice cracked, but his eyes were steady. The hunters regrouped outside the burning wall. Their red eyes scanned through the fire, calculating, waiting. They were machines, patient and endless. They would not give up. Daniel crawled to Clara, his face pale but determined. "We can't hold them here. If we stay, we die," he said. His eyes turned to the stranger. "Can you move? Can you run?" The stranger struggled to stand. His body swayed, but with Clara's help. He rose, his glow dimmed but did not vanish. "Yes," he whispered. "But storm, hard," Daniel nodded. "Better the storm than death." The explorers grabbed what they could, blankets, lanterns, tools, then pushed toward the back of the shelter where a narrow exit opened onto the frozen cliffs. The stranger followed, his light guiding them through the smoke. Behind them, the hunters broke through the fire. Their metal feet crushed the floorboards, their red eyes glowing brighter. The lead machine raised its weapon and fired again. The blast struck the ground at the explorers' heels, snow and ice exploding upward. "Run!" Daniel shouted. His voice was drowned by the wind, but they ran anyway. The storm welcomed them with icy claws. The wind pushed against their faces. The snow blinded their eyes. But the stranger raised his hand and the storm bent, as though shielding them. The snow swirled to cover their tracks. The wind shifted to hide their escape. Clara looked at him in shock. "You're controlling the storm," she whispered. His lips pressed tight, his eyes glowing faint. "Not control," he said. "Ask." The group stumbled across the icy slope, the stranger in their midst, behind. Them, the hunters gave chase, their glowing eyes cutting through the storm. Their heavy steps echoed across the frozen land. The explorers pushed forward, but fear followed close. Clara's heart pounded. Daniel's breath burned in his chest. Yet they did not stop. The stranger stumbled once, nearly falling, but Clara caught him, holding his weight with all her strength. The storm screamed around them. The hunters' weapons fired. Red beams sliced through the snow, missing by inches. Each blast lit the storm in a red glow. Each blast reminded them that death was only a step behind. Finally, Daniel shouted over the storm, "We need shelter, a cave, anything." His eyes searched desperately through the white haze. The stranger lifted his hand weakly. His eyes glowed brighter. In the distance, through the storm, a dark shape appeared, an opening in the cliffs. A cave. The group stumbled toward it, the storm itself seeming to push them forward. The stranger's power flickered like a dying flame, yet it held long enough to guide them to safety. As they reached the cave, the hunters paused outside. Their glowing red eyes scanned the cliffs. The storm grew fiercer, covering the humans. Escape. Inside the darkness of the cave, the explorers collapsed against the stone walls, gasping for breath. Clara held the stranger, his body weak, his glow fading. His head rested against her shoulder. His voice was barely a whisper. "Safe. For now." Daniel looked back at the storm outside, at the shadows of the hunters moving like ghosts in the snow. His jaw tightened. "No," he said, his voice grim. "This is only the beginning." The cave walls were cold and jagged. Yet, for a moment the explorers felt safe inside. Their breaths came out in sharp white clouds, their hearts still racing from the escape. The storm howled outside, hiding the cave entrance beneath endless snow. But the hunters were still out there, waiting. The stranger leaned against Clara, his glowing markings dim. His body shook with exhaustion. Every time he breathed, faint sparks ran across his skin, fading quickly as though his energy was slipping away. Clara looked into his glowing eyes and whispered, "Rest. You're safe now." but he shook his head weakly. Not safe, he said, his voice cracking. They never stop. They hunt until nothing left. Daniel paced at the mouth of the cave, his hand gripping the handle of his axe. His eyes burned with worry. He's right, Daniel said. Machines don't tire. They don't freeze. They'll search until they find us, the others whispered, in fear. Some wanted to abandon the stranger, saying he was the reason the hunters were after them. But Clara's voice cut through their panic, sharp and steady. If we leave him, he dies, and then they'll come for us anyway. The stranger's hand clenched weakly against the stone. His glowing markings pulsed brighter for a moment. You protect me, he whispered. Why? Clara looked at him, her breath shaky but firm. Because you asked us not to send you back, because you're alive, and because no one deserves to be hunted. His glowing eyes softened, as though her words touched something deep inside him. For a moment his trembling stopped. Then from the storm outside a sound cut through the wind. A long, metallic screech. The hunters were calling to each other, coordinating their search. Red lights flashed faintly through the storm, growing closer. Daniel cursed under his breath. We move now or we're trapped. The group gathered their gear quickly, wrapping their cloaks tighter. The stranger tried to stand on his own, but his knees buckled. Clara slipped under his arm, helping him walk. His weight was heavy, yet she didn't let go. They stepped back into the storm, the snow whipping their faces. The wind pushed against their bodies like a wall, but they pressed forward, guided by the faint light of the stranger's glowing markings. The hunters' lights cut through the storm behind them, sweeping across the snow like search beams. Each time the lights passed near, the explorers froze, pressing against the snowdrifts, praying they would not be seen. The stranger closed his eyes, his markings glowing faintly brighter, and the storm shifted, snow swirling thicker to cover them. Daniel noticed and whispered, "You're hiding us." The stranger shook his head. "Not hide. Storm helps me." The group moved again, climbing over frozen ridges and sliding down icy slopes. Their boots sank deep into the snow. Their breaths grew heavy. Yet the hunters never stopped. Their red lights followed, their heavy steps echoing, like drums of war. Clara glanced back and her heart jumped. One of the hunters was closer now, its glowing eye burning through the storm. It raised its weapon and a beam of red energy shot past, exploding into the snow just behind them. The ground shook, ice cracking beneath their feet. "Run!" Daniel shouted. His voice was swallowed by the wind, but they ran anyway. The stranger stumbled, his body trembling. His power flared once more, and a sudden wall of ice rose behind them. The hunter's beam struck it, shattering it into shards. But it slowed the machine for a moment. The explorers gasped at the sight. "He made that," one whispered, disbelief in his voice. Clara tightened her grip on the stranger. "He's saving us," she said sharply. "Now move." They pressed forward, the storm blinding their path. Their bodies ached, their faces burned with cold, but the thought of the red lights behind them gave them strength. Hours seemed to pass in the endless white. The stranger grew weaker with each step, his glow flickering like a dying flame. Finally, his legs gave out, and he collapsed into the snow. Clara dropped to her knees beside him, tears stinging her frozen face. "Please, get up," she begged. "You can't stop now." The stranger's lips moved, his voice faint. "Too weak. Leave me." Daniel crouched beside them, shaking his head. "No one gets left behind," he said firmly. "Not while I'm still breathing." He motioned to two others, and together they lifted the stranger, carrying him across the snow. The hunters' lights grew brighter behind them, beams cutting closer and closer. The machines were gaining. Their heavy steps echoed like thunder. Suddenly the cliffs ahead split open, revealing a narrow canyon. Daniel pointed. "There," he shouted. "Move!" The group rushed into the canyon, the storm funneling between the high walls. The hunters followed, their red eyes glowing like demons in the dark. The canyon echoed with the sound of pursuit. The stranger stirred weakly in Daniel's arms. His eyes flickered open, glowing faintly. "Cave ahead," he whispered. His hand pointed shakily forward. Through the storm, Clara saw it. A dark hollow at the base of the cliffs, large enough to hide them. "There," she shouted, and the group stumbled toward it. They reached the cave just as a beam of energy struck the canyon wall behind them. The ground shook, ice crashing down, blocking part of the passage. The hunters' lights flickered behind the falling snow, still searching, still following. Inside the cave, the explorers collapsed in exhaustion. Their bodies shivered, their lungs burned. Clara cradled the stranger against her. His glow was faint but steady, his eyes closed, his voice soft. "Safe. For now?" Daniel stood at the cave mouth, his axe in hand, watching the storm outside. He knew the truth. The hunters would never stop, not until they had the stranger again. His jaw tightened, his voice low but certain. "This fight isn't over." The cave was dark, but the faint glow from the stranger's markings lit the rough stone walls. The explorers huddled near the entrance, listening to the storm outside. The sound of the hunters echoed faintly through the wind, distant but never gone. Clara sat close to the stranger, cradling his head on her lap. His breathing was shallow, and every exhale carried a soft shimmer of light. She brushed melting snow from his hair, whispering gently, "Rest. You're safe here." But he stirred, his glowing eyes opening slowly. His voice was weak, but his words were heavy. "Not safe. Never safe." Daniel crouched near them, his face grim. "You need to tell us the truth," he said firmly. "We've risked everything for you, but we don't even know who or what you are." The other explorers muttered in agreement. Fear still clung to them like the cold, and doubt poisoned their thoughts. One man whispered, "Maybe we should leave him. Maybe he's the reason death follows us." Another woman said sharply, "No, Clara's right. He needs us." The stranger shifted, his body trembling. His glowing hands pressed against the stone floor. Silver light spread in faint patterns across the rock, as though answering his touch. Finally, he looked up at them, his glowing eyes full of sorrow. "I was made," he said. His voice cracked, but each word cut deep. "Not born like you, I was created by them." "The hunters," Clara whispered. He nodded slowly. "They are machines, but not only machines. They are servants of the masters, long gone but still obeyed. The masters built me as a weapon, a living tool. My body holds the storm, the fire, the ice. I was their soldier. I was their slave." The explorers sat in silence, his words sinking. Deep into their bones, Clara felt her chest tighten. She had seen his power, the fire that bent to his will, the storm that seemed to answer him. Now she understood the cost. "I served them," he continued, his voice full of pain. "I destroyed, I killed, I followed every command, my hands soaked in death." He lifted his glowing fingers, trembling. "But one day I refused, I would not kill again. So they marked me as broken. They hunted me, to return me or to erase me." His words echoed in the cave. The explorers exchanged glances, some fearful, some sorrowful. Daniel's eyes narrowed. "So you're saying they won't stop because you're their weapon? They want you back under control?" The stranger lowered his head. "Yes, they never stop. Machines don't forget. If I live free, I shame them. I prove their master's will is not perfect." Clara's voice trembled but stayed strong. "And what do you want?" His glowing eyes met hers, fragile and desperate. "I want to live. Not as weapon, not as slave. I want to be me." The silence that followed was broken only by the storm. The explorers looked at one another, fear and pity fighting in their hearts. One man stood, shaking his head. "We can't fight this. We're just people. We should leave him. Before those things find us again." Clara rose quickly, her eyes blazing. "Leave him after everything, after he saved us again and again. You want to throw him back to those monsters?" She pointed at the stranger, her voice sharp. "He asked us not to send him back. That means something, that makes him worth saving." Daniel stood slowly, his eyes fixed on the stranger. His face was unreadable. For a long moment, the only sound was the wind. Then he finally spoke. She's right. His voice was steady, carrying the weight of a leader. We chose to dig him out of the snow. We chose to carry him. We chose to fight with him. Now we finish what we started. Relief washed over Clara's face. The stranger looked at Daniel in disbelief. His glowing eyes shimmered with something new. Hope. But Daniel's voice grew hard again. You need to understand, he said to the stranger. If we protect you, it won't just be for tonight. It will be until the end. These hunters will never stop and they'll kill us to reach you. So if you stay with us, you fight with us. The stranger's glowing hand clenched into a fist. He nodded slowly. Yes, fight, together. At that moment the wind outside shifted. The sound of the hunters grew louder, closer. The cave walls trembled as faint red lights pierced the snow at the entrance. The explorers' hearts sank. They had no more time for choices. The stranger rose unsteadily. Clara helped him stand. His glow grew brighter, burning silver across his body. The cave filled with light as his markings spread like fire through his skin. He turned to Daniel and the others, his voice stronger. They come, but this time, I not run. Daniel lifted his axe, his eyes fierce. Then we stand. The explorers gathered their tools, weak weapons compared to the machines, but their resolve burned hotter than fear. Clara stood beside the stranger, her heart racing. She had never felt so small, yet never so determined. Outside, the hunters' steps grew closer, their red eyes glowing like burning coals in the storm. The lead machine's voice echoed through the snow. Subject surrender, resistance unnecessary. The stranger's glow flared bright enough to push back the shadows. His voice rose like thunder. I am not your weapon. I am not your slave. I am free. The explorers braced themselves. Daniel shouted. Ready, Clara whispered. Together. The stranger's eyes burned with silver fire, and as the hunters stepped into the cave's mouth, the final stand began. The storm outside howled like a living beast, but its voice was drowned by the heavy steps of the hunters drawing closer. Their crimson eyes cut through the snow like burning coals. The cave trembled as their weight pressed against the earth. Inside, the explorers stood shoulder to shoulder. Their faces were pale, their breath short, but their eyes burned with determination. They had nothing but axes, knives, and courage. Daniel gripped his axe so tightly his knuckles turned white. Clara held a lantern in one hand and the stranger's arm in the other. The stranger stood tall despite his weakness. His silver markings flared across his body, the glow spreading like fire through his veins. His eyes shone with bright blue light, filling the dark cave with a soft, unearthly glow. He was shaking, yet steady, afraid, yet unyielding. The first hunter stepped into the cave mouth. Its red eye swept across the humans, locking instantly on the glowing figure. Its metallic voice boomed. Subject detected. Return or terminated. The stranger lifted his hand, his voice strong and clear. I am not your subject, he declared. I am free. The hunters raised their weapons, beams of red light charged with a hiss. The explorers ducked, bracing for death, but the stranger's power erupted. The fire from Clara's lantern bent into a raging wall of flame, filling the entrance. The red beams struck the fire and vanished, swallowed whole. Sparks rained down like falling stars. The hunters staggered back, their metal frames glowing from the heat. Now, Daniel roared. The explorers hurled stones, swung axes, and charged forward with desperate strength. They knew their blows could not pierce steel, but they struck anyway, distracting the machines, forcing them back step by step. The stranger raised both arms. His silver glow blazed brighter. The storm outside howled louder, snow whipping into the cave, the wind bent to his will, driving shards of ice like knives against the hunters. The machines staggered, their crimson eyes flickering. Clara clung to his side, shouting above the roar. You can do this, you're not alone anymore. Her words fed him strength. His glow grew so bright the cave seemed to shine like daylight. He lifted his arms higher and the earth itself trembled. The stone floor cracked, the walls shook, and jagged spikes of rock burst upward, spearing through the legs of one hunter. The machine collapsed, its red eye dimming. The explorers shouted, in victory, hope rising in their chests. But more hunters forced their way inside. Their weapons fired again and again. Red beams tore chunks of stone from the walls. The cave shook, dust and rock falling like rain. Daniel pulled one of his men out of the way just before a blast struck the ground. The stranger stumbled, his body shaking violently. His glow flickered. Almost fading, Clara grabbed his face with both hands, forcing him to look at her. "Stay with me," she begged, her eyes wet with tears. "Don't give up now, not after everything." His trembling stopped. His eyes locked onto hers, and for the first time he smiled faintly. "Not give up," he whispered, with a cry that shook the cave. He unleashed his full power. Fire erupted from the ground, ice spears burst from the ceiling, wind howled like 1,000 voices. The hunters staggered, blinded by the storm of elements. Their weapons fired blindly, missing their targets. Daniel charged with his axe, swinging with all his strength. Clara swung her lantern, smashing it against a hunter's glowing eye. Flames spilled across its face, making it stumble. The explorers fought like lions, though outmatched. Their courage burned hotter than the machine's weapons. At the center of the chaos, the stranger shone like a star. His body blazed with silver fire, his voice roared above the storm. "I am not your weapon," he shouted. "I am not your slave." His words echoed like thunder. The hunters faltered, their red eyes flickering. The storm outside bent inward, filling the cave with a blizzard of snow and ice. The fire roared higher. The ground shook until it split. A final blast of energy burst from the stranger's body. A wave of silver light exploded outward, filling the cave and beyond. The hunters froze, their crimson eyes dimming. Their weapons dropped to their sides. Their metal bodies cracked and shattered like glass. One by one, they collapsed into the snow, their lights gone forever. Silence followed. The storm outside softened, the wind calming as though the earth itself was finally at peace. The explorers stared in awe, breathing hard, their bodies trembling from the fight. Daniel lowered his axe, his eyes wide. Clara held the stranger as his body sagged against her. His glow was fading fast. "No. Stay with me," she whispered desperately. "Don't leave now." His voice was weak, but steady. "I am free," he said, his eyes closed, his glow fading. For a moment, the cave seemed darker without him. The explorers gathered around, silent. Daniel placed a hand on Clara's shoulder. "We gave him freedom," he said quietly. That was his fight, and he won. But as Clara bowed her head, she felt a faint warmth in her arms. The stranger stirred, his glow flickering back to life, weaker but alive. His eyes opened slowly, glowing faint but steady. "I stay," he whispered. "With you?" Tears fell from Clara's eyes, and the others let out shouts of relief. Daniel smiled faintly for the first time. "Then we walk together," he said, his voice firm. "No matter what comes." The storm outside cleared, revealing the frozen land bathed in pale moonlight. The hunters were gone, their broken remains buried in the snow. The explorers stepped out of the cave, the stranger walking among them, free at last. They had unearthed him from the snow, but in truth he had unearthed something inside them as well. Courage, loyalty, and the power to defy even the darkest machines. And so the frozen stranger, once a weapon, walked into the new dawn beside humans who had chosen to see him not as a tool, not as a monster, but as a man.